Good evening and welcome. You're watching the Newstrack. The Iranian Supreme Leader coming out with his strongest statement in support of the Palestinian cause. Are we heading to a situation where Iran gets more directly involved in the conflict with Israel? And is Israel prepared for a multi-pronged conflict which includes having to deal with Tehran militarily at the same time? That's my top focus on the Newstrack.
Israel-Hamas war escalates. Iran gathers its proxies. Hamas-Hezbollah leaders meet. Terror conclave in Beirut. Iran sends out big warning. Will Iran now get involved? Israel ready for multi-front war? That is a big focus on Newstrack.
Iranian proxies came together for what's being described internationally as a terror conclave of sorts. The Hezbollah, the Hamas, the Islamic Jihad, all of them meeting, and the Iranian president, the supreme leader, on the same day coming out with a very strong statement in support of Iran against Israel, against the United States, talking about coming out more and more openly in favor of the Palestinian cause, leading many to wonder and question whether it is almost inevitable that directly or indirectly Iran will get further entrenched in the battle against Israel. And if it does, can Israel deal with a multi-pronged attack? Take a look at this report and then we'll get into our big discussion.
Israel's war on terror is getting bigger. With Hezbollah on one side and Hamas and Islamic Jihad on the other, Tel Aviv is fighting a multi-front war. And the terror groups seem to be working in tandem. The head of Lebanon's terrorist organization Hezbollah met with top leaders of the Palestinian terror groups Hamas and Islamic Jihad on Wednesday. The meeting between Hezbollah's chief Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, Hamas deputy chief Saleh al-Aruri and Islamic Jihad chief Ziad al-Nakhala took place in Lebanon. In a statement, Hezbollah said that the meeting was to assert their international position and to discuss what needs to be done to defeat Israel in the ongoing war. Hezbollah also added that every fighter who died in the war with Israel should be treated as a martyr. Hamas and Hezbollah share some common ideological goals and are supported by Iran.
This conclave of the Hezbollah, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad takes on huge significance because apart from their identity of being Iranian proxies, 19 days into this conflict, it could mean a more coordinated level of attacks to surround Israel.
If Hezbollah, which possesses significant military capabilities, joins forces with Hamas, it could create a more potent and coordinated front against Israel.
As a government, like I said, we are concerned, of course. But then again, Hezbollah knows that war is not a cakewalk for all parties. I mean, even for Israel also. The devastating repercussions of war are, no one wants to go into this scenario. And let's hope that it will not happen.
At the back of this meeting of his proxies, Iran's supreme leader warned that Israeli forces are incapable of confronting the Muslim fighters. Meanwhile, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has defended the Hamas, saying that Hamas is not a terror group, but a patriotic organization.
Şimdi buradan İsrail'e
Israel is acting like a terrorist organization and not a state. This will never be appreciated by us. Israel is not defending itself, but committing crimes against humanity. Whole world must act to stop these barbaric acts.
Şimdi buradan sesleniyorum.
Such an alliance could launch coordinated attacks, engage in guerrilla warfare, and escalate the conflict exponentially. Bureau Report, India Today.
You know, it's being called the Gaza Metro, this massive layer of underground tunnels in different parts of Gaza City, which really are the big imponderable in Israel's ground assault on Gaza. Many of those tunnels have been taken down in the aerial assault, but much of that network still remains. And the biggest question is whether the Hamas will be able to move around these tunnels and create multiple obstacles for Israel as their forces come in.
The horrifying 7th October carnage by the Hamas terrorists armed to the teeth killed thousands of people in southern Israel in the most brutal manner, shooting, burning and even torturing some of them to death. But Hamas wanted to ensure more casualties. Here is how Hamas' terror conspiracy of entering Israel via sea was foiled by alert Israeli forces. Soon after the 7th October brutality, Hamas wanted to strike again, this time with a tunnel attack. An attempt was made to enter into Israel through a tunnel built in the sea. But alert Israeli forces destroyed the tunnel and Hamas' weapon warehouse along the route. Hamas terrorists are notorious for their tunnel warfare, using them to attack Israel from the most unexpected locations. Hamas terrorists have even revealed how they planned to execute more attacks on the Israeli soil. Terrorist Yahya Sinwar, also known as the Butcher of Gaza, has revealed how they had planned to execute these attacks.
Today we have hundreds of kilometers of underground tunnels and hundreds of command and control centers that are above and underground.
That's not all. Listen now to how this Hamas butcher also revealed their biggest strength was not their fighters, but these underground tunnels.
What Hamas has done since they took control almost 20 years ago of the Gaza Strip is basically to build a network of tunnels from Gaza City and under Gaza City, which is the center and the biggest part of their infrastructure, all the way down to Khan Yunis and Rafah. So imagine we're looking at the Gaza Strip, but really think of the Gaza Strip as one layer for the civilians and then another layer for Hamas. And what we're doing now is that we are trying to get to that second layer that Hamas has built, by the way, only for itself, not to be accessed by the civilians. These aren't bunkers for the Gazan civilians to have access to when Israel is striking. No, it's only for Hamas.
Let's now take you inside one of these secret tunnels of Hamas. These tunnels, carved out of stone, go on for several kilometers. This is also being used to supply weapons and carry out attacks. A perfect shield to protect the Hamas. Let's now draw your attention to this terror tunnel built around the Islamic University of Gaza. The Israeli military alleges that the door of this tunnel opened at this university. Another picture you see on your screen shows the door of the tunnel next to a school. Hamas has set up a network of tunnels, which means the terrorists first attack and then hide underground in this tunnel built near the school. In another purported video, the Israeli army reaches a mosque. A room in the basement of this mosque is close to a tunnel. It is the same tunnel through which the terrorists entered into the mosque and also hid there to escape attacks by the Israeli forces. Schools, universities, mosques, Hamas terrorists have strategically chosen these locations for their tunnels to ward off any suspicion. It's these tunnels that Israel is now hunting for to break the backbone of Hamas tunnel warfare. Bureau Report, India Today.
Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei coming out very strongly in support of the Palestinian cause, blaming not just Israel but also the United States, talking about how the blood of poor Palestinians was on the guns of America and Israel. Is this conflict likely to escalate beyond just Israel versus Hamas? Is Iran likely to get involved? Because remember, while its proxies like the Hezbollah have been overtly and covertly involved, the moment Iran gets into the fray, the nature of the battle changes. Then it is Iran and Israel straight up against each other, Israel having the backing of countries like the United States, Iran having the tacit backing of Russia, potentially even China. That makes the scenario far more complicated. Are we inevitably heading in that direction? Joining us to talk about this, I want to welcome our guests on this broadcast. First and foremost, my colleague Shiv Arur. He's in Tel Aviv. He'll give us his sense of what's happening on the ground. With us also is Gaurav Sawant. He's just come back from Israel after 15 days of stupendous coverage from the ground. With us for a military perspective is Lieutenant General Atta Hasnain. We've got MK Simcha Rotman, chair of the Knesset Constitutional Law and Justice Committee in the Israeli Parliament. We've got Dr. Wael Awad, well-known political analyst, international correspondent, tracks the Arab world very, very closely. And I've got Abhijit Iyer Mitra back again, senior research fellow at the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies. I want to go across to Shiv first, because Shiv's been talking to many members of the Israel Defense Forces as they get set to launch the ground offensive on Gaza. Shiv, you have a sharp military mind yourself. What's your best sense at this moment of how the Gaza operation is likely to go? And on the question of whether the moment Israel enters Gaza, it's quite likely that Hezbollah, Syria and potentially even Iran could get involved.
Rahul, where I'm standing right now, which is the wall of the hostages, the wall of the kidnapped, as it were, in many ways answers your question about the complexities and the challenges before Israel as far as this ground operation is concerned, because there are no easy answers as to, why it hasn't happened so far, what scale it will assume. But the pictures of all these faces here, we understand to mark 20 days tomorrow, there's going to be a very, very intense crowd protest here in the heart of Tel Aviv. But to answer your question, yes, I have been interacting with IDF personnel, including people on the front lines near the Gaza front lines yesterday, and everything is completely ready, Rahul. If you look at it, the equipment, the tanks, the intelligence, it's all there. Phase 1 of this operation is already complete as far as air power is concerned, but 20 days in, there is an increasing sense that the window of opportunity for an effective ground invasion of the kind that the IDF had done in 2014 and 2009 is simply not available anymore. The reason for that is because the end game and the exit strategy has changed. In the past, Rahul, the sense is that any kind of ground invasion was about managing the levels of violence, knocking off a few of the leadership elements of the Hamas, and then, just managing the amount of threat that was there emanating from there. After October 7th, that calculation has completely changed, and for Israel, nothing is acceptable, nothing less than the complete obliteration of Hamas. And as you know, that's a very, very complicated proposition, given how widespread Hamas is. They've been gaining strength even in the West Bank, where they've never had much of a foundation. And then you've got this terror conclave where Iran has come out and started issuing these threats. Just 30 seconds more to answer your question about whether those other fronts will open. They've already opened. We reported from the West Bank where airstrikes happened for the second time in 3 days after 20 years, which is a huge thing as far as the West Bank is concerned. As far as the Hezbollah is concerned, there is a daily exchange of fire, very, very escalatory and happening much more often. Yesterday there was artillery pounding with Syria across the Golan Heights as well. So in effect, this isn't just 3 fronts, this is in fact 4 fronts. You've got Gaza, you've got the Hezbollah in Lebanon, you've got the West Bank, and you've got Syria. So this is on 4 fronts that it's happening. The ground operation isn't going to look like what it looked like before. I think it's going to be much more calibrated, Rahul. We do know special forces have started conducting search and operations as far south in Gaza as Khan Yunis, which is quite a big deal, but that still hasn't scaled up into a full-scale ground invasion.
Shiv Arur, I'm going to let you go. Thank you very much for joining us, and keep up the good work with that reportage from Israel. Shiv Arur there reporting for India Today. You can keep catching Shiv's dispatches all across the India Today network. Gaurav, you were in Israel speaking to different levels of officers in the Israel Defense Forces. How do they look at the question of Iran? Because it's one thing for Israel to go into Gaza, at some point in time, depending on the amount of days and weeks it takes, they will establish control over Gaza. That much seems quite militarily inevitable. But from what we've seen from the Iranian supreme leader and from what we know of Iran's designs, do you think we're building up potentially towards an Iran versus Israel conflict?
Rahul, it could even be bigger. The words that come from Turkey, the words that are coming from Egypt. This will be a wider conflict, and that's why the United States has 2 aircraft carrier strike groups in the Mediterranean Sea to ensure it doesn't become wider. But even Americans are under attack, both in Syria and in Iraq. American bases have been targeted by drones. 20 American soldiers have been injured. There were about 2,000 odd in Iraq, 900 odd in Syria, and they're increasingly coming under attack. And America has warned that there will be massive consequences in case Iran directly gets involved. So it's Israel and the United States on one side. You have British warships that are coming there. France says there's a wider coalition that's required against Hamas terror. So they're trying to limit this conflict to Hamas terror. But this meeting between Hezbollah, Hamas and the Islamic Jihad that took place in Beirut this morning, this shows that the effort on the Iranian side is to widen the scope, get Russia and China involved in some way. Of course, all of this is just posturing at this stage. But the moment ground forces get committed, this war is unfortunately likely to expand, and it will impact, like the Russia-Ukraine war, not just the region, but the entire world in terms of oil prices, in terms of other countries getting involved in this conflict. Keeping it restricted to Israel and Hamas appears to be the global effort right now.
General Atta Hasnain, Iran, even at this moment, involved through its proxies, like the Hezbollah. Do you think that's the way this is likely to stay? Or given the kind of belligerent comments that we're seeing from the Iranian supreme leader and from others in Iran, that we are inevitably heading in the direction of this becoming Israel versus Iran?
Thank you, Rahul. I don't think we have still got enough evidence to say that we are heading into a catastrophic all-out war yet. There is a lot of posturing taking place which inevitably happens. There's a tremendous amount of psychological warfare happening which also happens at some times like this. Influence operations are on. Meetings of this kind between terrorist groups in Beirut, etc. is again a part of posturing. Why I'm telling you this is because historically, Iran has succeeded with proxies all the while. Its experience of going to land-based warfare might remind you of the 8-9 years catastrophic Iran-Iraq war, in which Iran did not emerge anywhere. They had thousands of casualties, mines laid all over the place, wasted areas completely. And besides that, Iran and Israel do not enjoy a common border, except through Syria, through Levant, where you can have an exchange, a missilery exchange of rockets which can carry on, and the United States can come to the assistance of Israel to protect it over and above the Iron Dome. But that's not going to be all-out war. And I don't expect that Iran is going to step into the Levant, come into the area of the Golan Heights and start taking on Israel on the ground. No, that's not going to happen. So at the moment, very difficult to say, but I still hold my horses. I think we are still posturing, we are heading to a dangerous situation. Israel going into Gaza is almost certain, but whether it will go in alone, whether there will be a wider, a greater problem emerging on the northern borders, on the West Bank, etc. I would like to add a fifth front to what the various fronts which Shivarur had also spoken about. We also got to look at the naval side. There's a lot of activity taking place from the sea. And that's the front from where all the infiltration and all the wherewithal normally comes into Gaza.
Abhijit Ayamitra, General Hasnain's reading is this is a lot of posturing, influence operations. Iran has typically preferred to fight through its proxies. There is no land border with Israel, and that's the way it's likely to stay at this moment. While we are seeing belligerence, it's unlikely we'll actually see a direct military conflict between Iran and Israel. What's your reading, Abhijit?
Absolutely. Just 2 points, Rahul, if you don't mind me adding to a question you asked before. There's been a news report that's come out of the US, and that's what my colleagues in the Pentagon are telling me, is that there is US pressure on Israel to delay till US forces on the ground in the Middle East are fully deployed and additional assets are deployed till they get into full operational readiness to prevent a spread of the conflict. That's number one. Number two, there's apparently a serious Israeli second, third order consequence gauging happening right now. They only gauged the first order of consequence when they planned for the Gaza land invasion. Now they're looking at the second and third order effects, which is typically Israeli. I'm surprised that they hadn't done that already. But to answer specifically your question, Iran, sometimes I worry. We know, at least the Israelis are telling us, we don't really know, but the Israelis are telling us there's a very significant Iranian imprint on this. Iran gains a lot if Israel spends a lot of its time hammering Hamas and Gaza. Because remember, Hamas is not ideologically aligned to Iran. It is a Sunni organization, a Muslim Brotherhood-linked organization, which has never had good relations with Iran. In fact, they've been fighting each other in Syria viciously. If you remember, all the Al-Qaeda organizations up in the north were pretty much against the Iranian-backed Bashar al-Assad regime in the south of Syria. So, it makes perfect sense to me that if Iran is coordinating, it is coordinating so that Hamas takes the blow. But then the question is, what does Hezbollah do? There has to be a Hezbollah gameplay here that when Hamas takes the blow, Hezbollah takes a trophy home. So General Hasnain is absolutely right. They've perfected working with, sub-conventional warfare, essentially proxies, very well. But where does that game lead to? Number two, I suspect one of the games we're going to see is, if you remember in 1990, Saddam Hussein launched Scud missiles at Tel Aviv and Israel in general. I'm wondering at what point does Iran decide to do that and use that as an excuse to test a nuclear device and declare itself a nuclear power? I suspect one of these two trajectories, either Hezbollah making gains of some sort, I don't know what, or Iran playing its nuclear card.
Okay, so let me ask General Hasnain that question. From a military perspective, our producers have compiled just some basic data of the Iranian armed forces versus the Israeli armed forces. Given the practical contemporary reality, how, if God forbid it ever were to come to that, how do you see this battle go? Iran versus Israel?
I'm not sure I've got your question entirely right, but yes, on a ratio proportion method, or just the numerical numbers which are available of the two together, it really makes no sense whether a competitive kind of a war between the two of them, what will it result in? At the end of the day, I think it's all going to end in a stalemate. No ground movement. I don't expect any kind of a ground movement, but an escalation in the proxies war. Definitely an escalation in the proxies war. The use of Hezbollah, the support to Hezbollah. Remember that the supply lines from Iran to Hezbollah are open at all times, unlike the case of Hamas. So it is Hezbollah which will play the major role in case this has to come to an escalation between Iran and Israel.
Gaurav, you want to share with our viewers your sense of, God forbid, if it ever were to come down to an Iran versus Israel war, how's that likely to go?
So Iran will use the Hezbollah, and that's why Israel is already bombing the Syrian airfields at Aleppo and in Damascus to ensure that Hezbollah's supply line is interdicted and it's not a continuous supply line. They're trying to ensure Hezbollah doesn't get all the weapons. Hezbollah is also not escalated beyond a point. So everyone's calibrating their response. Hezbollah is targeting the Sheba Farms area or some of those watchtowers or tanks.
But Hezbollah can't have a situation where Hamas becomes the Palestinian hero. So at some point in time, they will, and we've seen that with Tanzim in Jammu and Kashmir as well. If one gets super active and is staging big operations, the other also feels the urge to do something spectacular.
True. So that is where they'll calibrate. Hamas, as far as Israel is concerned, since it's an existential war, and from a young corporal to their army chief to their prime minister, Everyone's saying we have to decimate Hamas to ensure it doesn't remain a ruling entity at the Gaza Strip or even as a terror entity. Their initial target, that aerial bombing, is to destroy all the tunnels, the maze of this apparently 500 kilometers of tunnel, 1,300 odd tunnels. They want to destroy it to the best of their ability, but they want to get their hostages back. Phase 1. Phase 2 is through Mossad, try and take out the leadership, whether it's in Qatar or in other places. Hamas doesn't remain, so that Hamas doesn't remain an entity. Is Iran, according to Israel, is their biggest threat? They're saying you have to cut off the head of that snake, and the head of the snake is Iran. How they intend to go about it, from what I've been able to gather, their limited objective is Hamas. Their wider objective would be Iran, but America says, hold your horses, let's at least ensure that Hamas is decimated and the civilian casualty does not escalate. So as of now, I think this battle will remain there, containing operations on the western front with the northern front with Hezbollah, and massive operations in the south, quite like our 1971, if I may, holding operations in the west, big operations in the east.
Okay, let's go across to Simcha Ratman, Chair of the Knesset Constitution, Law and Justice Committee. Mr. Ratman, I want to ask you about Israel's impending offensive in the Gaza Strip. We're hearing from Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who said once again that an offensive is coming. It's been a long time coming, hasn't started yet. How do you see this operation in Gaza proceed, and what do you militarily think would be the end objective once the IDF gets into Gaza?
So the military objective has to be the same, doesn't matter when the army will get in on the ground. The military objective must be the militarization of the Gaza Strip. We cannot accept any weapon in the Gaza Strip. We must have it, all the threats over our people be eliminated, because we all saw what's happening when we have this kind of threats. It does not stay as a threat. We saw the murder, we saw the rape, we saw the fire, we saw everything. So we cannot accept any weapons in Gaza Strip aimed at our people. And that's the military objective. It's the destruction of all the abilities of Hamas, the army abilities, the governance, everything must be annihilated for the same simple reason, because we must exist in this area, and we cannot exist with this kind of threat over our body. Now, of course, when and where the army will attack, it's something that I'm not responsible of. It's for the security cabinet and the army to be on this issue. And of course, I'm not gonna discuss those issues in the media.
The other question that's being asked again and again in strategic circles worldwide is about the end game in Gaza. At some point in time, over the next several weeks, as the IDF goes in, they will be able to militarily establish control over Gaza. But last time, the Israelis chose to come out because they didn't want to govern Gaza. So politically, in your view, who administers Gaza once you've gone in and taken down the military capabilities of the Hamas?
This issue, I think, is not an issue we should discuss now. No one ever, not a single soldier who came to fight Nazi Germany from all countries of the world that went and fought this fight, no one held a map of what exactly will be the border, what will happen with Berlin, what will be with the Marshall Program, or any other arrangements that came after the war. In the war, there is a clear objective: to defeat the enemy. That's the objective. What's happening after, we'll have all the time in the world to discuss once Gaza is demilitarized and there is no threat.
You know, there have been reports in Israel that 100,000 Israeli citizens have applied for a gun license in just the last week. How do you assess this urge amongst Israeli citizens to take security in their own hands and not be dependent on the security forces for their security? They don't want to be taking any more chances.
So of course, events like we saw on October 7th disrupt the basic security feeling and the security of the communities in Israel, all around, in the cities, in the rural areas. We all know what happened. And so many people naturally want to have the ability to defend themselves. Also, before those events, many lethal attacks by terrorists were prevented or were stopped in the middle by civilians having their own guns with gun permits. So it's gun permits in this neighborhood of the world saves lives. So of course, naturally, a lot of people in Israel asked for it. I have to say, I dealt with this issue for a few years, and we were asking also from former government to expand the scope of the people that are eligible to carry a gun. And this is, of course, it came now better late than never, and we see the numbers spike.
And the biggest concern that anybody should have at this time, Abhijit Iyer, is the potential of escalation by miscalculation, where it's not desired for a particular outcome to be the end result, but just in the manner in which things go, it moves up the escalation ladder in a way that things become much bigger. And we're seeing a lot of American generals and other top military experts talk about this being the most dangerous moment in the world since after the end of the Cold War.
Absolutely, Rahul. Look, sometimes we think that terror organizations think through their actions. In fact, if you look at the actions of the last 20, 30 years, even more, you'll find that, terror organizations tend to focus on that one big moment. And they don't actually calculate what happens after that.
Do you think the Hamas thought of that moment, or have they thought through the IDF attack as well?
I don't think they have. A lot of people are speculating on the internet that they've planned for this for ages and they're digging down, and it's going to be like Grozny again, after Pavel Grachev bombed Grozny to rubble, and then, the Chechens took out wave after wave of Russian tanks going in. You hear all of this speculation. The problem is we haven't seen proof of that. We haven't seen proof.
We haven't seen proof to the contrary either. We haven't seen proof to the contrary either.
We haven't seen proof to the contrary either. So we have to be very careful about speculating. However, if history is anything to go by, terror organizations simply do not think through what comes afterwards. So, for example, Al-Qaeda really didn't plan what was going to come after 9/11. We don't think Pakistan planned what came after 26/11. Very similar things. This is, now assume they have planned, in which case Israel is not the one that is doing escalation dominance at the moment. That escalation dominance lies somewhere else. We don't know where that is. That will be revealed in the course of time. However, if my suspicion is correct and Hamas did not plan what the second and third order effects of this attack are going to be, then you're pretty much in free fall. And I think that's a lot more dangerous, because now we don't know. Everybody's sitting and doing their cost benefit calculations at the moment. And the problem with rushed calculations, which do not take in intelligence inputs over weeks, if not years, becomes very dangerous, because you're prone to huge amounts of miscalculation.
Okay, let me put that same question to General Hasnain. The one theory is that Hamas is just delighted to have been able to stage an operation of this magnitude, and they probably got luckier than they even imagined. The second is that this is very deeply thought through. Not just did they pull off an operation of this precision and scale, they've also now laid a lot of landmines, booby traps. They're waiting in these tunnels for the Israelis to come in. Then it's a trap the Israelis have laid out. But that also sometimes happens where you just start over-imagining the capabilities of your enemy. Which of the two is more likely to be true from what we know in the public domain, General Hasnain? You're on mute.
Thank you. Excellent question. I'm tempted from the top of the head to say that terrorist organizations do not ever have a second order to think about. They always look at conflict initiation, never look at conflict resolution, or never even talk about conflict progression. This is very well true in Kashmir. We have seen what happened with Pakistan and the terrorist organizations that they have been using. But here, when you look at what happened on the 7th of October, this event was a little extraordinary as far as conflict initiation is concerned. I would go along with everyone to say, yes, yes, this is just exactly what terrorists do. But the depth and of planning here seems to point to me that there is something more to it. And the manner in which they have developed the tunneling, the manner in which the western seacoast is completely open, the manner in which all kinds of wherewithal has come in. Obviously, Hamas has got itself organized to fight a more conventional kind of a conflict than just a hit-and-run guerrilla kind of a terrorist tactics. And that is, so we will know in the first 7 days perhaps, if Israel decides to go in with ground incursions, I do think the first 5-7 days will be very crucial. Because if they break through, then we'll know that Hamas is on the run. But if right at the outset, in northern Gaza, if they are held back, if from bunker to bunker they got to fight, I'm not sure how adept is the IDF at that under the current circumstances. They have not done this for a fairly long time, and we are aware that training isn't something on which they have been emphasizing a lot in the recent past. So I am tempted to go along and say finally that I think the Hamas has thought this through to a little greater extent than what normal terrorist organizations would normally do.
You know, they're also thinking this through in a very Machiavellian way quite deeply. And I want to cite an illustration. Those two women who were freed, quite old, but both of them have husbands who've been held captive by the Hamas, and that basically means that the more they speak to the media and to the public and to society, they will talk about their husbands still being with the Hamas. It's not just any two random hostages who've been left. These are two people whose husbands are still there, and therefore they're highlighting the fact that they have 200 plus Israelis. These aren't normal Lashkar or Hizb type terrorists. These are terrorists who are working with military precision and military thinking.
Rahul, you're spot on. And the officers of the IDF I spoke to, they said this isn't Hamas thinking, this is the Iranian army thinking. This is the Iranian army that has planned this operation down to the last detail. The fact that they came...
So you're saying like we had this Major Samir and the others of the ISI who were directing the terrorists. There are similar Major Samirs from Iran who are doing this.
Not only directing, not only planning, look at the meticulous planning. Terrorists, over 1,000 infiltrated, armed to the teeth. They didn't have to go back for ammunition. They carried ammunition, surplus ammunition in pickup trucks. They carried in pickup vehicles. They carried empty vehicles to take back hostages. So they thought this through. They thought this through that we'll need more ammunition. They left behind so much ammunition because they wanted the siege to continue longer. In Sderot, the Hamas terrorists stayed perhaps 3 more days after the 7th of October attack. They carried vehicles to take back hostages. They knew which are the hostages to take back. The women, the children, the soldiers. They've taken back soldiers. They had specific addresses of military installations. They attacked military installations. They had maps of tunnels inside those installations. They blasted those tunnels. They picked up more ammunition and soldiers. That is how they've planned it, including where will the hostages be taken back, when will they be released, and they've planned this to the T.
No, so just tell me, because you spoke to so many Israelis about this tunnel, it's the network of tunnels is called the Gaza Metro, as it were.
Yeah.
Are they connected with each other? Are they just like limited tunnels with a small network, or does it run around large parts of Gaza City and they're actually connected with each other? How big is it? How deep is it?
So from what I was told by IDF officers, and some of them, since they've gone into Gaza in the past,
they've been in those tunnels.
They've been in some of those tunnels. They've photographed some of those tunnels in the past. They've taken journalists, Israeli journalists, in some of these tunnels. So there are shallow tunnels and there are deep tunnels. And Rahul, these are concrete tunnels. They would be, why is it called the Gaza Metro? Because it's not just dug with hands. It's been properly excavated, goes down a couple of levels. It's got concrete roof, concrete walls. It's got electricity, it's got rooms, and perhaps hostages are being kept in those rooms. And it's not just one tunnel, 1,300 tunnels running across. They're underneath mosques, they're underneath schools, they're underneath houses, and civilians are not allowed to use those tunnels. Only the Hamas leadership and
So
cadre.
we're seeing a lot of aerial bombardment, Abhijit, on the Gaza Metro. How much of that tunnel network do you think has been demolished? How much still exists? Or is it impossible to say with any authority unless the IDF actually gets there and sees for itself? And then there's the possibility of IEDs, landmines, and all kinds of booby traps in these tunnels.
Look, you can't really be demolishing the tunnel network. It is a complete city. It is an underground city. We have actually seen Israeli thermal camera images in the north on the Lebanese border of, Hezbollah cities built underground. We suspect that the cities in Gaza are similar. It would almost be the same size as Gaza. These are extremely sophisticated tunnels. They have ventilation, they have air conditioning, they have all kinds of things. They have lockout chambers even. So, if you use, for example, fuel air explosives, which is to say thermobaric explosives down there, which kind of suck out the air and, turn the air you breathe into as incendiary. Even with that, it's going to be very difficult. You need the ground campaign to go in. What the air campaign is doing right now is it's taking out concentrations of weapons. You'll notice a lot of the hits are producing very significant secondary explosions, which are sympathetic detonations of ammunition stored in there. The others are, intelligence collection centers. So, for example, the Gaza Islamic University was almost like an R&D center for where new kinds of rockets and especially the guidance mechanisms were being developed out there. They have a very sophisticated network like this. I think the air campaign is primarily focusing on removing the ground targets. It is the ground campaign that will focus on clearing out the tunnels, and that is going to be extremely painful. I know for a fact the Israelis have mapped out a considerable amount of this underground city realistically, but the problem with tunnel systems like this is you actually have to get in there and do a lot of the things, because if they're hidden under buildings, you can't really tell. There's only so much LIDAR or ground penetrating radar can tell you with buildings on top. So all of this will have to happen once they go in, and then we can get a sort of time gauge on what the task at hand is.
How much of that tunnel network, General Hasnain, do you think is being destroyed? Because the Israelis don't need to destroy the entire tunnel network. They just need to destroy the key arteries so that you can't go from one junction in the tunnel network to the other. How much of that do you think is being taken care of during the aerial bombardment?
See, Rahul, no one really knows what is exactly the layout of the tunneling system, but I suspect that the kind of conflict initiation that they have carried out, Hamas has carried out, they seem to be confident of being able to fight underground for quite some time. That seems to be the center of gravity of their entire resistance, it seems. The manner in which the Israelis have gone about bombing, I have my doubts. You see, from a normal understanding of an infantry soldier, 3 feet earth is normally sufficient for an artillery bomb landing on you. Now, in this case, you've had artillery, you've had lots and lots of missiles and rockets. Let's say even if 5 feet to 6 feet worth of earth, packed earth, and concretized on top of that, if it is there, then the effect is going to be very, very marginal inside. I suppose only when we inspect this at the end of this war will we really finally come to know as to what is the terminal effect of all the bombing which the Israelis have been doing. But I've got another point to add here, just to introduce it as a wild card. We've been talking about Iranian presence there, Iranian influence on the Hamas, etc. We've forgotten the aspect of ISIS. You see, this genocidal initiation obviously smacks of a ISIS advisory. And it seems that ISIS, after, its distribution into different conflict centers around the world, one of them being Afghanistan, has also found its way here. And possibly some of them are in advisory role.
Okay.
Now, the kind of experience they've had in Fallujah, the kind of experience that they've had in Mosul, is all available to the Hamas here.
Well, very dangerously placed this. We will track very carefully what happens. For the time being, I want to thank our guests, our reporters on the ground. We'll keep tracking the situation in Israel and in Gaza very carefully. My colleague Shiv Arur is at the Shura military base in Israel, where they showed a lot of the videos shot by the Hamas soldiers when they came in. Here is Shiv's latest ground report.
These ordinary-looking containers hold the horrors of Hamas. Terrifying proof of the brutality that was unleashed on October 7th.
The blue bag that you see right here is the body of a child. Somebody's kid. I don't know what more proof the world needs for the atrocities that happened.
This is the Shura military base in central Israel, which has been turned into a makeshift morgue. These are the victims of Hamas carnage.
Container upon container holding the remains of hundreds of people who were massacred by the Hamas terrorists on October the 7th. We've just been briefed by dentists, police officers, forensic professionals who say that it's been difficult, and even 18 days after the fact, it's difficult to identify many of these bodies. They believe that with truck after truck bringing in bodies, this is a work that they owe their friends, their loved ones, the relatives of those who are dead, because the basic that they deserve is the beginning of closure. In each one of these containers, there are perhaps tens, hundreds of bodies. Some of them just heads, some of them just ribs, some of them just brains, some of them just dismembered bodies, all simply waiting to be identified, whether by a fingernail or a jawbone. The remnants of October the 7th, all packed in bags, neatly refrigerated in metal containers, because that's what it finally comes down to.
Hundreds still remain unidentified.
Mothers, children, fathers, family members. They have not yet been identified, and their family members are waiting to hear what has happened to them. Some of them are completely charred. Some of them are dismembered, their bodies mutilated by a terrorist organization who acted not just against Israel, but against humanity.
Some of these bags just contain dismembered body parts.
There are bags arriving here with body parts. Some only with a brain, some only with ribs, things that are sick, that no human should see.
Doctors and forensic experts have been working tirelessly to identify bodies. The smell of death hangs heavy in the air.
Point where I want to cry, but I don't know if I can cry because I'm in the middle of a mission and there are families that are counting on our work in order to be able to bury their loved ones. We have seen every type of mutilation and disgrace to bodies that is possible. Heads chopped off of bodies, pre and post-mortem, children and full families burned, grenade thrown into a bomb shelter to just splatter a family all over. I'm sorry for being that graphic, but that's just how it is. And every single time you open a body bag, you have no idea what's going to fall out. A jaw, a tooth, some ligaments, burnt flesh, full families fused together by fire.
This is hands down the hardest thing I have ever experienced in my life, and I speak not just for myself, but for my colleagues as well, both dentists, both anyone who's involved here in the police, in the military. This is a Holocaust for us. None of us has ever seen, felt, smelt any of this. The number of people, the number of victims of innocent women, children, babies, elderly, the nature of the injuries, of the torture that these people have been through. They have been shot, and they have been axed, and they have been burnt alive, and they have been cut. And this is something that is etched in my mind forever.
This is what Israel wants the world to see.
Nobody had to explain that terrorists committed 9/11, the Twin Towers in New York. No one had to explain the ISIS attack in Paris and the attacks across the globe. But here we are, here I am, opening trailers with bodies. 784 bodies have been identified so far, so that you understand the amount. And 688 have been transferred for burial. These were people's family members. Parents will not hear their kids' laughter. Children will not get to hug their parents or get a kiss goodnight.
Hundreds identified, but several hundreds more still unaccounted for.
These two containers that have just been opened here at the Shura military base contain some of the bodies that have been brought here unidentified. Many of them are dismembered, many of them are charred beyond recognition, and a gargantuan effort to identify each and every one of those bodies is currently underway by police, forensic teams, dentists, doctors, and of course the Israeli Defense Forces. There is a humanitarian operation that's on, keeping in touch with each and every family so that they get closure and are able to bury their loved ones. And this is just two containers. There's an entire lineup of containers all through the Shura military base where bodies are kept. We're told that there are hundreds, perhaps 1,000 bodies that are there, many of them of Israeli soldiers as well, most of them of Israeli civilians. There are several bodies of babies as well, we're told, that are in these containers. They've been kept open for a very, very short time, obviously, because they're refrigerated and they need to be preserved for forensic reasons. But here on India Today, we always show you the frontline story. And this is an image that Israel wants the world to see, to remind the world about the barbarity that was perpetrated by Hamas terrorists on innocent people all across this country. Shiv Arur at the Shura military base in central Israel for India Today.
You know, we're heading towards Diwali, we're heading into pollution season this time. It's not just Delhi, but even Mumbai, which is heavily polluted. The city, despite being so close to the sea, seeing some of its worst pollution. And in the north, farm fires raging in Punjab, in Haryana, ensuring that we are heading to some terribly polluted days over the next few weeks.
Delhi is shrouded in smog once again. As pollution levels increase, stubble burning has started in Haryana and Punjab, adding to the city's woes. The air quality in the national capital on Wednesday dropped to the very poor category. In adjoining Noida, it was recorded at 218 or poor. And in Gurugram, the AQI was 168, which means moderate. Lodi Road, Delhi University, Model Town, IIT Delhi, and International Airport are among the areas worst affected.
There is information available that the farm fires in Punjab and the adjoining areas have also started increasing, while usually since the last few days Punjab daily farm fires had touched the 200 mark. For yesterday, that was on Tuesday, it clocked the 300 mark. Apart from that, we also saw Ravan effigies being burning, leading to pollution. So coupled with all these regions, the Delhi NCR has once again dipped into the poor category.
The BJP blamed the Arvind Kejriwal government for the pollution spike.
देखिए, ये अरविंद केजरीवाल जी एक ऐसे व्यक्ति हैं, आप आज पूछिए, जो बाइडेन के ऊपर धर देंगे लेके कि सब कुछ उनके लिए हुआ, अमेरिका में हमारी सरकार आएगी तब जाके ये दिल्ली ठीक होगा. तो इस प्रश्न का कोई उत्तर नहीं है. ये अरविंद केजरीवाल जी को संभालना, उनके प्रश्नों का उत्तर कोई नहीं दे सकता है, क्योंकि वो घड़ी घड़ी रंग बदलते हैं.
व्हीकल पोल्यूशन है, उसको कम करने की कोशिश हो रही है. दिल्ली में पटाखों पे प्रतिबंध है, दिल्ली के अंदर ग्रीन बेल्ट को बढ़ाया जा रहा है. इन सब का इम्पैक्ट क्या है कि अगर आज ये सारी चीजें नहीं होती तो फिर आज 300 नहीं 450 AQI होता.
According to the government data, over 2,500 cases of stubble burning have been reported this year so far. The AAP government in Punjab claims farm fires in the state are down by half. The Haryana government, headed by BJP, claims compared with last year, the cases of stubble burning have reduced by 60%. The Agriculture Department in Haryana is imposing fines on farmers burning stubble. Despite these measures, farmers were found to be burning stubble.
सस्टेनेबिलिटी की तरफ देखना पड़ेगा. इंडस्ट्रीज जो है दिल्ली के आसपास और जो त्योहार वगैरह हैं उसमें सस्टेनेबिलिटी का फोकस लाके फटाकों का प्रयोग कम करके चलते हुए हम इसको कंट्रोल कर सकते हैं.
There is really heavy smog which we can see surrounded all over the India Gate. Although we have a good heavy plantation nearby, but we can feel heaviness in breathing. It's not that easy.
For Delhi, the worst is yet to come. Experts say farm fires are likely to peak between October 27 and November 15, around the time the city celebrates Diwali. Vishriya Chatterjee, Bureau Report, India Today.